Welcome to the Book Binge. I'm your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and today, if there was any book to leave me utterly bereft, The Sparrow is the one to do that. Existentially speaking, this book left me in many ways quite devastated. The reason why it is called The Sparrow is what really sealed the deal on that front. But I get ahead of myself. There's nothing really to say about this intro. I have like 1,100 words of notes for this review. A typical review only gets like 5, maybe 600 words of notes. 700 words or more for review notes is a lot, so we have a lot to get through. I don't want this video to be an hour long, so let's talk about the good of The Sparrow, if we can call it good with how absolutely devastating it was. But the main thing that The Sparrow does, that I want to give this the respect that it deserves for, and that I really want to make clear to anybody watching this video, anybody considering reading this book: The Sparrow and nuance go together like peanut butter and jelly, man. This is the selling point of the book for me, is the nuance with which all of the topical and thematic topics and themes are explored. Like it is so well done. Mary Doria Russell handles everything in this book with such nuance. It is actually breathtaking, actually incredible. Hard to believe that a book covering some of the topics that this does could handle some of those topics with as much nuance as she does. It's absolutely insane. For reference, The Sparrow is a sci-fi book, but deals very heavily with a lot of Christian thematic, topical ideas, and explores those in a very philosophically engaging manner. You know, the sci-fi ideas and the religious themes are both separate and together within this book, and explored separately and together. The balance of it is incredible. You know, speaking about those topics in and of themselves, I can say that The Sparrow has just enough sci-fi stuff going on, you know, has just enough tech explanation to satisfy my personal suspension of disbelief. So all of the sci-fi elements work well enough for me to just kind of work with its conceit. I really like it. But the main thing is that it balances all of that material with a ton of super thought-provoking philosophical exploration on the religious themes and stuff like that. It manages to both swell and break the heart back and forth constantly throughout the book. There's so many different moments at which, like, you are just really there and happy with the characters on the page, and other times where you're just left absolutely like pre-devastated, you know, just kind of the dread that is exuded by the book is like second to none, and I don't think that's hyperbole at all. You know, these points, both the sci-fi and the religious side of things, like this comes on both a character front between like character relationships, which are very well handled and very well balanced, and also very, very realistic. You know, that all of that is handled very well throughout, but it also comes on the sci-fi front as well, with, you know, the natural hopes and dreams associated with the sort of conceit of what this book is, being first contact related. And like I said, the way that all of this stuff, the way that all of the topics, the way that all of the themes are weaved together and all dealt with such nuance is incredible. But let's talk a little bit more about some of those individual ideas a little bit more specifically. When it comes to religious theming in particular, I want to also make known about The Sparrow, you know, relatively early on in this review, is that this does not take either a directly optimistic or directly pessimistic view of basically anything. It's most specifically in the religious regard, but also the other topics as well. You have such a good balance of how some of these ideas and stuff are explored throughout the book in general, that you never feel like you're being preached to from one end of the spectrum or the other. Mary Doria Russell does not, within the narration or within the book itself, actually take a side regarding any of the ideas being explored. So you feel like you're actually being led to not specific conclusions, or conclusions rather, you're being led to a conclusion circle where you're able to gather the information that has been given to you and figure out what you think is being said. And that it's very impressive that such a thing was able to be done. I think that none of the conflict that could come out of a book being both pessimistic or optimistic or being neither, none of that becomes conflicting in the Sparrow, because all of this is handled so well done. There's certain pessimistic moments, there's certain optimistic moments. There are those moments, and there's plenty of cynicism at certain times as well, but none of these ever, like I said, feel in conflict with each other, because they are representative of the people from whom the book is being told, like those POVs, those characters. It's so good. Like, I'm sorry, this review is probably garbage up to this point. Like, I'm just listening to myself talk, and I feel like I'm not actually saying what I want to be saying. But speaking about the people, this is one of the particular points, along with sort of the themes and stuff that we'll probably touch on in a little bit. The people of this book, the characters of the Sparrow, this nuance that this book is so good at exists with them as well. They are so unique. They don't feel forcefully unique. Nobody is token anything in the Sparrow. It is just a matter of multiple individuals occupying this story together, and they feel like those individuals. This isn't just in terms of the roles that they play or basic personality. It's not anything as simple as, oh, this person does this thing, this person does that thing, and this person likes this thing and this person likes that. No, like, there's such a complex map of what makes each one of these characters tick, and also what ticks them off, that is laid out so well, and mostly so implicitly, that those motivations, the desires of them, feels natural. They themselves feel very, very natural. Every single party feels genuine, and like, in that genuine nature that they all have, there are plenty of conflicts. This isn't all just lovey-dovey, like happy-go-lucky conversations or anything, or it's not anything overly quippy in the sense that it doesn't feel realistic anymore. Like, there are also plenty of conflicts in this book. There are very good, close relationships, and there are good conflicts even within those relationships that are portrayed in ways that I haven't seen portrayed elsewhere in things that I've read. Like, real arguments that feel so genuine to each party, that I feel like I knew the main cast of characters from the Sparrow as if I knew them in real life. It is very rare that I give that sort of compliment to a book, and whatever other books I've given that compliment to, I don't think they hold a candle to this. Like, the characters feel so genuinely like true personal individuals. It's almost as if Mary Doria Russell just straight up ripped specific people out of the real world, put them in her book. Like, not in the way that you can tell they're modeled after anybody. I mean, like, as if somebody was just taken off the street and relocated into the world of the book instead. And yeah, it's incredible. It is so good. And speaking of like arguments specifically, that also reminds me of the way that character interactions occur between the duo timeline storytelling of the Sparrow. And that point is another thing that is just so impressive. Like, let's summarize how the story is told a little bit without giving anything too much away. The Sparrow is told between future and past timelines. I didn't know this when I went into the book, but you read 2 chapters and you realize that they're jumping between different points in the timeline. So it's not like it's anything too spoilery to say that you are exploring multiple timelines at once throughout the course of this book. Each of those timelines have their own thematic and topical focuses. But the way that those topical and thematic focuses come through, and the way that they center on a particular character who is the main character of the book, who is, yeah, just I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm just trying to choose my words very carefully here. the way that both of the storylines explore this character and explore the time that has passed and the things that have happened, you have a good idea of how things are going to go as you read the Sparrow, because you do have the future timeline stuff, so you know more or less how the past timeline stuff is going to end up, because it's more or less being told to you outright in the future timeline, right? So that's something that you have to consider. So what this book does is less about trying to be like the most engaging plot per se. It is all about character and thematic focus within that specific plot. Yet the book doesn't give up on some element of not quite surprise, but anticipation, in exploring the ideas and the plot that the Sparrow is exploring, and doing so between the basically two different timelines that are going on. You have, that anticipation of things that are going to happen in the plot. You're just waiting for things to happen, waiting for things that you have an idea of how they're going to happen, and building anticipation for it. And a better word than anticipation to use to describe this is dread. I mentioned dread earlier. The Sparrow evokes a genuine dread unlike literally anything I have ever experienced. To say that the dread that this book exudes is unmatched is an understatement. It is second to none. I do not think I will ever be able to read anything else that makes me feel like this book did while I was reading it. There's actually nothing that compares in my mind. Maybe I'll read something someday that will, but I would be very surprised if I did. In this book, that shit eventually hits the fan. It happens from the very beginning, but you don't know when precisely it happens, and you don't know how precisely that's going to take form. Yet, you still know the entire time that it's going to happen, and seeing the particular experiences that characters go under in the past timeline makes it hard to keep reading, because you know that things are going to happen and you don't want it to, but you just want to keep living with those characters. You just want to keep experiencing things with those characters because you love it, but you hate that bad things are going to happen, but you know that bad things are going to happen because you've seen the future timeline, but it hasn't been super explicit with what actually happens, and it doesn't get that way until the end. The Sparrow is a slow burn with dread, and that slow burn is incredibly effective beyond anything that even seems possible to do in a book. It is truly, truly unmatched. People have described things once upon a time in very many different places about certain experiences, or even certain things that they've watched or read or whatever, as being like, watching a train wreck, like it's awful, but like you can't look away, right? The Sparrow is sort of like that, but it's also not, because a train crash implies that it kind of happens relatively quickly. A car crash happens quick. A train crash happens a little bit slower and with a little bit bigger scale. But if you really, really want to put into words the dread of reading The Sparrow, it is more like being transported to the Titanic with knowledge of the iceberg. That is what it is like. It is like being transported to the Titanic hours before it hits the iceberg, but knowing about the iceberg the entire time and not being able to do anything about it, but you're stuck on there. That is what reading The Sparrow feels like, because you know that it is going to get bad. You know that things are going to happen. The dread just keeps building, and you just keep getting anxious about it, more and more anxious as time goes on, but you don't actually know when it's going to happen. You don't know what time it is let's just say you have a knowledge of the iceberg, but you don't have knowledge of the timeline of when you hit the iceberg. You just know that you're going to hit the iceberg. That is what reading The Sparrow is like. It is such a slow burn. It is the slow but inevitability is what this is about. You know what is going to happen. It's going to happen. You don't know how. You don't know when. The entire thing just so effectively makes you feel that it is truly dumbfounding how well Russell manages to do that. But yeah, so I'll stop talking about that particular point and move on to the final major point that I want to talk about for the good, and that is the character work. I already, kind of touched on this a little bit. I just want to clarify the character work is legitimately exceptional. Even if some conversations seem a little bit over the top for certain levity reasons at times, it is merely a factor that the dynamics and the back and forths of the relationships here is incredibly engaging and very tough to watch and witness. It is like watching friends, it's like being with friends to a certain degree, but knowing what several of them are thinking at various different points in time. I found myself getting lost in my head because of the way my real life felt like it was pulled in some ways. I talked about how it felt like real people were pulled out of the real world and put into this book. I feel like certain relationship dynamics that I have either experienced or witnessed just straight up appear here. There's a honesty to the way that Russell portrays characters that I can't get over. Like it actively ruined my day in some cases. There were a couple mornings that I read the book that some conversations were so real in I don't even know how to describe it. It is merely that some of my days were ruined because some of the conversations were so real that they felt like conversations I've had or seen in real life that were tough to handle. Like I just don't know how else to say it. There is an honesty to the way that people are portrayed in The Sparrow that itself is also unmatched. There's so many things about the good of the book that are unmatched, but not everything about the book is going to be completely perfect. Let's talk about the bad here, but to be fair, most of these points about the bad are going to be relative to some topics that I've already talked about the good. There are things that didn't put me off, that didn't bother me at all in the slightest, but I've seen have put some other people off. So I think they're worth mentioning here, even if I think I disagree with all of these points. We'll see. But what it comes down to is that there is a degree to which certain characters have a degree of like convenient affability and enthusiasm in conversation that might get a little bit old for some people. I see the point that people are making. It never bothered me personally. To me, it is like basically a necessary tonal balance to the dread that is otherwise being built and made me care about those characters in a very important and real manner. So, like I said, it never bothered me, but it is something that I've seen kind of bothered some other people in some other reviews. There's also the added point that the nuance of theme throughout kind of sells the balance of the levity versus the dread in ways that I think like actually makes the book better for having that versus if there wasn't any. But again, I've seen some people be bothered by it to a certain degree. There is a certain degree to which the Sparrow sort of tries to be like not really hard sci-fi, but it does try to have a sort of hard science vibe to a certain degree without fully committing to it. So to me, it's mostly just that it's trying to do enough to retain the suspension of disbelief without trying to do so much over the top that the science is the main character, because the science isn't the main character. It's the theology is more the main character, to be perfectly honest. So there's just enough science for it to be believable, in my opinion. It does this, but I know that there are some other people who think that there are too many unbelievable leaps that are taken there, and I see why. Like, I understand, but again, it's not something that bothered me, not least because that's not really what the book is focused on. It's not truly focused on being the sci-fi thing, because you could do some of this exploration without the sci-fi veneer. But for me, it does enough to keep my suspension of disbelief intact, even though I have seen it, again, bother some other people to a certain degree. There's also the matter of surprise. I talked about anticipation and dread. There are some people who did kind of want to be surprised by this, who want there to be like a twist. There's a sort of like, it's not really a twist near the end. It's more like a clarification about some things, so not quite a proper twist, but there are particular decisions within the book that surprised me a little bit. But what it really comes down to is, as a result of the way that timeline is handled and the fact that you are aware that something bad happens the entire time. You're not going to be surprised when something bad happens at the end. There is no real surprise to the book. You essentially know what's going to happen the whole time, but that's intentional because it is the thematic palette of what everything is doing. That is the point of the book. It's not the surprise of the plot. That's the point of the book. But if you want to be surprised by what this is doing, you're not going to be really that surprised by where it's going on a plot basis, because it basically, it doesn't tell you explicitly from the outset, but it tells you implicitly from the outset. So, there's that. And then the final point here is I mentioned that the book is a slow burn, and it is definitely a slow burn. I've seen some people, talk about like getting through the first like 200 pages even and feeling like they hadn't really experienced very much. And you know what? Valid complaint. That is true. It took till, pretty close to the like 75 or 80% mark of the book before the emotional climax actually happens, before the actual scenes take place where that climax is then allowed to occur. It takes so much buildup. It takes almost the entire book to build that up with both of the timeline stories going on to really get where it's going. To me, that build up, that slow burn is ultra effective, but I know some other people won't feel that way. So if you're not somebody who's into slow burns, or if you tend to really struggle with them, the Sparrow might not be for you, but I think it's worth giving a shot nonetheless, and then there's, just the fact that like I put the Sparrow in the good for a lot of reasons. But the only other point about the bad that I want to talk about, and it's not even really a bad thing, it's more of a taste thing. There's deals very heavily with certain theologically thematic material, specifically Christian stuff. If you hate religion in your books, or if you hate that kind of topic being explored, obviously do not read this book. You could probably read the blurb of this and be able to guess that it's not going to be for you. The Sparrow tells the story of a charismatic Jesuit priest and linguist to make first contact with extraterrestrial life. The mission begins in faith, hope, and beauty, but a series of small misunderstandings bring it to a catastrophic end. And like the entire religious thematic palette comes from that genuine, that general thing. If you're not into religious theming in your book, don't read it. Like just do not. I'm 100% serious here. I've said this in certain other reviews, but if you can't abide by this general thematic realm of stuff, the book's not going to be for you. It's really not. I think that the Sparrow is unique in how much nuance that it does have, that the nuance that it takes with the exploration and how all of that stuff is discussed. But again, that is topically very forefront. So if you can't abide by that, being the entire point of the book, then it's not going to be for you. Because the entire point of the book is basically to question, it explores the age-old question of why would a good and loving God allow good people to suffer? That's what the Sparrow is doing. And so if you can't engage with religious stuff in good faith, then this book isn't going to be for you. But that's going to take us into the ugly, because it's actually on a sort of related point to a certain degree, and that is really a thing that I'm not going to spoil it for obvious reasons, but the reason that this book is called The Sparrow is actually insane. I was wondering for the entire book while reading it, like, why is this book called The Sparrow? Like, what's the deal with that? What's the deal with the title? The last chapter makes it pretty crystal clear. And on the thematic side of things, let's just say it's an absolutely brilliant reveal. It's handled so incredibly well. But the ugly is that The Sparrow is at least the second book this year to make me cry because of the reason it's called The Sparrow. That was the moment that broke me. That was the moment that made me cry. I'd have to really think about it, like what other books have made me cry and if there were any others this year that did so, but I'm pretty sure this is the second one this year. I would say just the second one, but I don't think I've had another year so far where I have had more than one do that. But in either case, it's a crazy achievement. I thought I would make it through this book without crying, but then then Ms. Russell said, nope, you're going to cry anyway. And it worked. So, yeah. Why is this particular point in the ugly? I think I'm including it here in the ugly because I didn't think that the other sections felt right for me to say, like, oh yeah, this book was so good it made me cry. Is more of the thematic stuff that was like, just it punched me right in the gut. Also amidst, a lot of active spiritual semi-crisis that I've been going through, like, for the last handful of months, basically. This book is very ultra confronting on that point. And I guess, kind of moving into the recommendation here, actually, if you happen to be somebody who's really struggling, like, existentially, maybe keep away from this book for now. But if you're not somebody who's struggling existentially, and you want something that is incredibly nuanced with theological theming and exploration, specifically regarding that question that I mentioned earlier about why would a good God let people suffer, if you want that without it being super authorial either way, without the author getting their mitts into the oven and, coming to the conclusion for you, this book is incredible because Russell doesn't impart any particular takeaway from it. It is a genuine, honest exploration of that question, and it is very, very well done. Another piece of recommendation for, a particular audience, my particular audience, for example, if you enjoy Sun Eater and A Canticle for Leibowitz, I think that this, in some topical ways, feels like a sort of in between those two. That's not to say that it's like either of them, but there are certain topical and thematic things that are being explored between some of these three books where they feel like relevant to each other in some way. Canticle for Leibowitz is a very religion forward in a sci-fi way. It's not, like I said, it's not like plot wise anything similar to the Sparrow, but there's a way that sci-fi and religion come together with Canticle for Leibowitz that Sparrow kind of reminded me of, with regard to the topics of certain general theological theming ideals, as well as the first contact thing, and what first contact kind of looks like. That general exploration, that general conceit, is something that the Sparrow kind of shares topically with Sun Eater, not in the way that it is explored in any way. Again, it's not like Sun Eater. It's just something that I think people who enjoy Canticle for Leibowitz and Sun Eater are going to be a slam dunk for enjoying the Sparrow overall. Again, it's not because it's like them. I think it's because fans of those things will be able to enjoy this. Because, yeah, it's a very good and honest exploration of what it is trying to do. As I mentioned before, if you hate religious themes, this book is not for you. And also, like I mentioned before, if you're struggling, maybe hold off a bit. But at some point, I very, very highly recommend reading The Sparrow. There's just so much worth thinking about with this book that I'm 100% certain that I forgot to even mention certain things in this review. I know that this review was an absolute mess in some regards because I just couldn't figure out how to say what I wanted to say. I have notes, but the notes were insufficient, quite frankly. It's too difficult to consolidate all of the minutia of what this book covers and the quality of how it covers it. Again, like the very first thing that I said in this review, the main selling point of The Sparrow is the nuance. If you want a book with incredible topical nuance, The Sparrow is second to none in how well it regards all of this stuff. Suffice it to say, I think that The Sparrow is a masterpiece. I think it is uniquely inquisitive and so a masterpiece because of that. It is very inquisitive, yet Russell lets the characters ponder the questions rather than herself. It's the reason why what she thinks about these particular topics never really comes through, and it lets you, the reader, kind of figure out what you think based off of your experience with the characters. And it's also going to be very heavily based on your own experience in your real life regarding some of these ideas. Russell does not force any inherent interpretation or bias, in my opinion, and the amount of restraint this takes is absolutely unbelievable. Being able to cover a primarily theological theme story and not be like making a point that you want your readers to get out of it specifically is like that is why this book is effective, because it takes that offhand approach and because it manages to do so genuinely, so honestly, and with so much nuance. You know, it's The Sparrow is, if nothing else, a modern classic currently, because I think it came out like 20 years ago or so, maybe just under 20 years ago, so it's not that old of a book, but I do think that it fits the criteria for a modern classic, in my opinion, and I think that in time it will absolutely be a genuine classic. Like, this is, without a doubt in my mind, this is a masterclass of what it is doing, and I couldn't recommend it more highly for anybody who is of a mind to be able to read it in good faith, right? So yeah, that is the review. Thank you for watching this. I'm sorry that the review is probably as garbage as it was, because I do think it was probably garbage, but I made the point. I made the point that I wanted to right at the very beginning, and I think that was good enough. You know, thanks for watching the review nonetheless. Come Thursday of this week will also be a pretty big video. A lot of the videos this month are quite long, to be completely honest. It's unfortunate for me, but you know, come Thursday is the effective close to a 3-year endeavor with reading The Wheel of Time, and I'm anxious for that. So, you know, for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC. I hope to see you guys in that next video if you're interested. But for now, I'm going to take off because I need to get packing done for a trip that I'm taking over the next handful of days. So I gotta go. Thank you one final time for watching. Hope to see you guys in the next video.